Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Face Your Ears podcast. My name's Rich Bozick, and I'm joined here today with my friend and co-host, Justin Hoshella.
Hello, everyone. It is I, Justin Hoshella. How's it going, Rich?
Pretty good, pretty good. A lot of good things happening in the studio here. A lot of quality voice lessons happening. Working on people's songs, getting people ready for performances. I'm also doing some restructuring in the studio. Got a few equipment upgrades, which we could maybe talk about at some point, but that's the bulk of it. How about you?
Yeah, things are good here. Let's see. Something interesting I've been working on that I've not done before, but I wanted to sort of experiment with is creating a sound pack. So I've actually been working on a sound pack for a synthesizer that I have that is actually sold out right now. It's kind of hard to get your hands on. So I had this idea of like, oh, it would be cool if people could at least access some of the sounds from the synthesizer. And so it's a digital FM synthesizer. It's very clangorous and metallic sounding, and it's built off of the same architecture as the Sega Genesis. So if you're familiar with the Sega Genesis sound, it's evocative of that. But my focus has been on percussive loops. And so FM is a little tricky to create like drum percussion loops. I've sort of challenged myself to create just percussion loops solely based off of this synthesizer. So there's no effects added. It's just MIDI triggering the synthesizer. That's it. So it's a collection of sounds. I'm up to 30 loops. It's actually pretty time consuming because I'm just trying to create, something interesting and different each go round. So it's been a fun project. So I hope to post these up on my website once they are complete. My goal is to get 50. So once I have 50 completed at various tempos and just different styles and stuff, I'll get it posted online and post a link in our show description.
That's excellent. I was just going to ask you about that. Like, where could we find them? Thanks for letting us know. manmaderandom.com and
yes,
voice lessons and vocal stuff at bozickvoicestudio.com. So, Justin, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Is this podcast available on Podcast Index?
Why, funny you should ask. It is, yes.
How about iHeartRadio?
Well, let me check my notes. Yes, in fact, it is available on iHeartRadio.
Now, this one may be tough, but how about TuneIn and Alexa?
That one I can tell you immediately, right off the top of my head, that yes.
Excellent.
It is available.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everyone who's listening, you can find this podcast on all of the major streaming platforms. Well, Justin, can you tell me, what are we here to discuss today?
Today, we're going to be talking about something that we are currently using at this very second, an audio interface.
Oh.
So we're talking about audio interfaces today, and in episode 1, cue the way back music, we talked about audio interfaces at a higher level in more general terms. What one is, how to go about selecting one, things like that. In this episode, we are looking to dive into the details. So we're going to pop the hood, so to speak, investigate some of the more technical aspects, what those mean, why you might care about those, and how you might take advantage of them. So that's what we're getting into today.
So, Justin, the question I have is, what are the essentials, like the bare bones essentials when you're looking at an interface? What are the things that we're looking at? What do we need?
There are definitely features of an audio interface that are a must-have. Those include things such as an XLR connection and line/instrument inputs.
What are XLR inputs for those of us who might not know?
Yes, XLR stands for exciting ligature roundabout. So XLR is the standard connection for microphones.
What does it look like when you see it?
So the XLR connection is sort of a triumvirate, if you will, of 3 pins. So if you're looking down at it, it's almost like a triangle shape of 3 different pins that are coming out towards you. So that connects into the audio interface where you'll find the corresponding connector. And so XLR is a pretty common connection. Line or instrument inputs are what you'll use for, say, a guitar or like a keyboard connection. And some interfaces, quite a few these days, have what's called a combo input. So it can actually accommodate either or.
Oh, that's cool.
So it just sort of takes the guesswork out.
So how do you know you have the combo input?
An XLR jack has 3
pin
ports, three ports for the pins, whereas a combo jack has those same 3 ports for the 3 XLR pins, but also in the center it also has an opening for a line level instrument.
And that's a 1/4 inch input.
Yes, a 1/4 inch input.
For those of you who may still be wondering about this, so think about this. Like when you plug headphones, like normal headphones, like your earbuds into a phone or an iPad or whatever, it usually has the small jack, which is an 1/8 inch jack. And then the 1/4 inch jack is like the bigger one. So sometimes you'll run into the bigger one on studio headphones, or you'll have the adapter that you put on the 1/8 inch jack to make it bigger.
Yeah, really common is a guitar.
There you go, a guitar
so
cable.
If you're familiar with a guitar cable, that's 1/4 inch.
Excellent. All right.
So those are really important. USB is also really important. The faster, the better. So if the interface supports something like USB-C, which is a faster USB protocol, cool. But at the bare minimum, it should have some simple way of connecting to your computer. Usually that's USB. Phantom power is going to be pretty important as kind of a price of admission feature.
What is phantom power? It sounds kind of like Halloween-ish.
Yeah, Phantom Power is our Halloween song cover band that we are announcing here in this episode. Phantom Power is required to power specific types of microphones. So, Rich, you and I are actually using microphones right now that require Phantom Power.
I'm using Phantom Power right now.
Phantom Power! That's going to sound great with reverb and delay. So Phantom Power is a very common feature, but I think it's one to think about, especially if you're wanting to use a higher end microphone, capture a better signal. MIDI is something to consider as well. It isn't necessarily a must-have unless your situation requires it.
Hold on.
A lot of...
What is MIDI?
Yeah.
And what is MIDI?
Yes. MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It's a protocol that was established in, I want to say, 1983 by... I don't think it was Yamaha, but I think they had a major stake
What time
in it. Anyway,
did they do that at?
I believe it was 1:37 p.m. Japanese Standard Time. So early 80s, Musical Instrument Digital Interface, also known as MIDI, was born. And it was a big deal because it created a standard language, if you will, for instruments, electronic instruments, to talk to each other. And so I could send things like notes and timing information between my instruments. So that was done using MIDI cables. And those MIDI cables would connect devices, instruments to one another, and they could trigger one another and synchronize with one another and so on and so forth. And that was wonderful. Fast forward to today, and MIDI is less of a, I guess MIDI is still very prevalent. It's evolved, I suppose, is the best way to think about it. Because usually you'll get musical signals traveling over USB. But if you have an older piece of equipment, it probably has MIDI.
Why do they still include MIDI ports on newer pieces of equipment?
That's a really good question. And the reason for that is so that we can continue to incorporate older equipment, such as a Yamaha DX7, which is a famous digital synthesizer from the 80s. And so if you listen to soundtracks like Top Gun, or even Driving Miss Daisy, they prominently feature the Yamaha DX7. So if you want to use a Yamaha DX7 with your modern computer, you can use that MIDI interface on the DX7 with your computer MIDI interface.
Excellent.
So that's kind of why, is it bridges the gap between the past and today.
Excellent. What else? What else should we be looking at?
Stereo output at a minimum, left and right, so that you can have speakers to mix and monitor and do all of that.
So there's more, though. You could get more.
There is, yeah. You can have multiple outputs. So, for instance, the interface that I use has 2 pairs, so 4 total outputs. So 2 of those are connected to my speakers, left and right, and then 2 of those are just sort of auxiliary, which is kind of neat because then I can send audio out of my computer to, say, my guitar pedals or an outboard effects processor.
Interesting.
You can use those different outputs in different ways. Another way you can use it is to send your signal out to a different pair of speakers. So one trick a lot of producers do is they actually get a pair of crappy speakers intentionally and will switch between their very nice fancy studio monitors that cost $1,000 or more to these like $50 crappy speakers, with the idea being that the mix should translate. Like it should sound good between both sets of speakers. So that's another way you can use it.
Now, is that why when you look at pictures of studios, sometimes you'll see like multiple sets of speakers? Like I'm looking at these pictures sometimes and I'm like, why are there like 5 pairs of speakers here? So that answers the question.
Generally, yeah, it's just the ability to literally listen on different speakers. And side note, there's even software available today where you can actually get a microphone, a very specific kind of microphone that's measuring frequency response and things like that. And it will actually tune your speakers to sound like other speakers digitally.
Interesting.
So,
wow.
So that way, you know, if you don't have a budget of, $200,000 to buy 5 pairs of high-end studio monitors, this $300 solution is a good alternative.
What else should we be looking at?
Another thing that's important on an interface is at least one headphone jack, preferably with its own independent volume control.
What do we need that headphone jack for?
Yeah, the headphone jack is good for multiple scenarios, especially for a home studio. Most likely you're living with somebody else or you have neighbors. So having a headphone jack just ensures that you can very easily continue to work and make music regardless of the time of day or who might be around. So it allows you to have that privacy, essentially. That's one scenario. Another more technical scenario, and I think we've talked about this idea on the show before, is when you're recording vocals, you want to make sure that you have a separation between the playback of the audio and your microphone. So the thing that you're trying to avoid is bleed through from your speakers. So the playback of your track, the instrumental of your track coming out of the speakers into the microphone, that's not something you want. So by turning your speakers off, putting a pair of headphones on, it ensures that does not happen and you get a nice, clean, pristine recording of your vocals.
That's excellent. So you talked about some of the basics that we need to be looking out for. Now, can you give us a little bit of insight into some of the lesser known features or optional kind of things we could look at when we buy an interface?
Yeah, so there's definitely some nicer, more Rolls-Royce, if you will, features available. Like any product, there's always the whistles and bells as you go up the ladder, and audio interfaces are no different. As you invest more in an audio interface, you should expect more. So what are some of the things that you can expect? Well, one of those things is audio level metering. So some audio interfaces don't give you a sense of your signal strength. So you want to make sure it's kind of in that Goldilocks zone. It's not too soft. It's not too loud. It's just right. And so in metering, it generally gives you a sense of if that signal is, strong, if it's weak, or if it's clipping. And when I say clipping, what I mean is distorting.
How do we know if we have audio metering on the device?
The metering can be color coded. So the interface that I use has what are called halos, a little circle around the knobs that indicate the signal strength through color. So green is strong, yellow is getting close to clipping, and red is clipping and distorted. Some have a more sophisticated visual display of the meters, very fancy high-end displays that indicate the meters kind of bouncing up and down.
Like a graphical display almost.
Yeah. And so so you have that. You also have the ability with interfaces where you have line versus instrument. So instrument level signals and line level signals. So basically those instrument level signals, they're kind of between like mic levels, which are a little bit lower, and line levels, which are a little bit higher. So like a line level, I think, is like a keyboard, like that Yamaha DX7 I mentioned. And so interfaces have the ability to adjust based on the signal it's receiving. So if it's getting a signal that's louder, it can attenuate the signal, and vice versa. So if it's getting a signal that's really quiet, it can boost it as well.
So just to clarify, so you were talking about audio level metering, and then a separate feature could also be this line versus instrument. Is it a knob? Is it a button? What is it usually?
Yeah, it can be a button. It can be in software. So, my interface has the ability to go into software and just click a button to switch between line versus, instrument processing.
Okay. What else? What? I have a question for you. I often hear people talk about preamps. I mean, I know what an amp is.
Yeah.
Because I play guitar, but preamp sounds to me like, what is this, something like, can you explain?
Yeah, so a preamp, for all intents and purposes, a preamp is essentially something that's converting a weaker signal into something that is strong enough to be like heard and processed and that sort of thing. And a preamp is oftentimes responsible for coloring a sound, so kind of giving it its sort of sonic quality. It can be great to have different preamps. It can also be very expensive. So that's why when you go into a studio and you see these racks and racks and racks of equipment, a lot of that are preamps because they offer different sort of coloration to the sound. So certain preamps are better for voice, certain preamps are better for drums, certain preamps are better for guitar, etc. Audio interfaces have preamps built in, so that's something to consider. As you invest more and more in an audio interface, you're investing more and more in the preamp. So generally speaking, higher end audio interfaces tend to be built with higher end preamps. So you get a really nice sonic coloration to the sound. That's really desirable. Decibel padding is another feature that you can find in audio interfaces that essentially allow you to attenuate the signal. So I talked a little bit about line level versus instrument, that kind of thing, and that's part of it. But sometimes you need even more attenuation, depending on your genre. Maybe you're recording punk rock or something that's super loud, and that can help bring it down.
So, okay, attenuate, for those who might not know, is when you bring down the signal. It's too loud of an input signal, and you need to kind of cut it back a bit. Am I correct?
Correct. Exactly. Some interfaces have a power save mode, which can be handy, especially if you're mobile. So that basically just puts it into a sort of standby mode.
So mobile meaning you're recording in places other than your home studio.
Right. You're using a laptop or an iPad, for instance. Another feature that you may come across or hear about is SPDIF, SPDIF.
I've seen that. So please explain.
Yes. So SPDIF is a digital audio standard protocol, and one of its really neat features is that it allows you, kind of like MIDI, to connect devices together so that they can essentially talk to each other and recognize each other. With audio interfaces, that can be very handy in that it allows you to increase the number of physical inputs that your computer can see. So, for instance, let's say you have a scenario where you're recording a drum kit, and that drum kit has the need you need 15 microphones to properly record that drum kit. So you've got different room mics, you've got different mics on different drums, you've got all kinds of different mics set up. However, the problem is interfaces generally don't have more than, let's say, 8. And so you've got a problem. How do I simultaneously connect 15 microphones and then record those into my DAW at the same time? Because that's logical, right? Like you would, if you're recording drums, you don't want to be like, all right, now we're going to record the hi-hat.
Yeah. One at a time, like one piece at a time.
You can't record drums. All right, now we're going to do the toms.
Yeah, that's very tough.
Like, you can't do that, right? So with audio interfaces, you can use digital audio connections, like SPDIF or like optical audio. That's another one you'll see. So that you're basically, it's like Voltron. For those of you that remember Voltron, you kind of bring their power together. So if I have one interface with 8 physical inputs and another interface with 8 physical inputs, and I connect them digitally, my computer now sees 16. So that's a solution to that problem of how do I get more inputs into my computer? Well, that digital audio link is what solves that problem. It allows you to basically stack interfaces and daisy chain them together. It's sort of a technical term, but it just basically means connecting devices together in series.
Excellent.
Mute buttons. So, Rich, you and I were talking about this. I was looking at audio interfaces the other day, and the Focusrite 18i20, I believe it is, has a mute button.
Wow. You know, it's funny because, when I'm shopping for interfaces, and even the interfaces I'm running into in people's home studios, I'm not seeing a mute button on these things. Like, what I mean by that is, like, let's say you're recording your vocals. So you're listening to your track through the speakers, and then you want to record your vocals. You have to physically go onto the interface and turn down the speakers and then turn up your headphones. And sometimes you might not go back to exactly where you were. And I was always thinking, like, why isn't there just a button? Why can't I just mute that and then record? So here we go.
It's like the smallest thing, but here on Face Your Ears, nothing is too small. So we're here to help you understand how these small features can make a big impact.
Something I want to ask you about is bus powered versus external power supply. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so bus powered just means that the audio interface is powered off of the computer's port. It's USB port usually. And that's really helpful or handy when you are mobile and you're moving around a lot. So maybe you have, a laptop or an iPad and you're recording in a mobile fashion. That can be really great to have something like that. So you don't have to like lug around or worry about like a power supply for that sort of thing. So yeah, that's really the biggest difference. And generally audio interfaces that are more sophisticated and offer more features have a power supply because they just require it.
I noticed with some of the high-end interfaces, they have built-in effects, like a built-in processing unit in the interface. And at least what I gather, when you get an interface that's like this, like for example, I was looking at Universal Audio's Apollo line, and the thing I noticed was they had the built-in interface, and in built-in effects in the interface. And the things that I was reading about was, I guess it minimizes the stress on your computer. Can you just talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so Universal Audio is a really great audio equipment company. They make very sophisticated high-end audio recording equipment that a lot of high-end studios use and rely upon. And one of the problems they've done a really great job at solving is computer processing needs. Like, even though our computers today are super duper fast, they're still, in a lot of cases, not fast enough. And so what these audio interfaces are doing is offloading that processing onto the interface itself from the computer. And that just ensures that you have far more resources available to you than ever before. So that's the idea behind it, and it's pretty cool. And Universal Audio also makes really great software and plugins to boot. So these aren't like afterthought kind of plugins. These are premium, high-end studio grade quality plugins.
I think we have a lot of good info here. What I want to do, just to crown it all off, can we do kind of a lightning round of just last things to consider when you buy the interface?
General things to consider when buying. So yes, price, of course, is something that you want to think about. And I think, honestly, like anything else, the more that you're able to spend on something, the more you can get. However, I also think that you want to make sure you're not buying more than you need. And so I was kind of, in preparing for this episode, I got down that rabbit hole of looking at interfaces, and I was like, oh, maybe I need to get a new one. And I've always wanted a rack-mounted audio interface. And so like I got to exploring and comparing a rack-mountable interface, actually the 18i20 versus what I have now. And I came to the realization that, like, from a quality standpoint, there was going to be zero difference for me. So I was like, oh, okay, I don't need to spend, more money on something that I'm not going to use or need. However, on the other side of that coin, I think that you want to think about today versus tomorrow. So think about things like number of inputs. So today it might make sense to have one, maybe two inputs. However, do you have aspirations of building a studio or starting to learn a new instrument like keyboard? And so maybe you'll add a keyboard or two to your rig in the future. So as you're adding more equipment, you'll likely need more inputs to record them, especially if they're going to be recorded simultaneously. So if you have a musical partner you work with or a band, having more inputs is going to be a consideration for you.
The real question is, have you mastered what you currently have? Are you good at using it? Do you know all the features? Have you exhausted the possibilities? Have you outgrown it?
So wise. Yes. I'm guilty of this. I recently became annoyed that every time I wanted to play one of my synthesizers, I had to open up my DAW and arm a track and listen to it. And I was like, I wish I could just hear it through my audio interface. Well, guess what, listener? You can do that very thing with my interface. And so I got even more value and use out of my audio interface that I've had for 2 years.
Physical size of the interface.
Yeah. So
talk about that.
Interfaces come in wildly different shapes and sizes. They can literally fit in your pocket to being standard 19-inch studio rack size. So it just depends on the type of interface and the manufacturer and all those different things. I think for someone buying one, though, they should take that into consideration. And one thing I would mention too is that, rack mountable stuff, usually they have those ears, the rack ears that allow you to mount it in a rack. And that can actually be kind of annoying when you don't have a rack. Maybe you just have like a desk or something. So a lot of times those can be removed. So Rich, I know that you have the Tascam audio interface, and that one has the removable ears on it, so you can use it kind of like a desktop style or in a rack. So that's something that
yes,
nice.
I have the Tascam US 16x8 because I got an electronic drum kit. But yeah, you're right. It could go either way. It could be on the desktop or screwed into the rack. Hey, thanks, man. This was a great discussion. I think we got a lot of basic information out there, and I hope everyone finds this helpful. Thanks, Justin.
You're welcome. Thank you, Rich. And hopefully this demystifies things a little bit for folks that are out there looking for an audio interface. But if you have questions or ever need anything, we're both here to help. So make sure to hit us up on Instagram or Twitter if you have any questions or comments that you want to share.
Excellent. And definitely check out the resources page on our website. We'll be putting some things up probably about this episode, I imagine.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we will catch you next time. Bye.
Take care. Thank you for listening to the Face Your Ears podcast. If you found this episode entertaining and informative, be sure to share and leave a review. Also, check us out on social media and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. For more information related to our podcast, head on over to www.faceyourears.com. Links can be found in the show description. And remember, whether you're a musician just starting out or a seasoned professional looking to talk shop, it's time to face your ears.